Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another terrifying installment of Halls of Horror. I am your host, and your solo host for the evening for the first time, True Crime Stories. Tonight, we are going to be discussing somebody I've heard a lot of suggestion about. Somebody that people seem to want to know about in a greater detail, and that is Pogo the Clown, also known as John Wayne Gacy. Now, for all of you that don't know, this is one of the scarier ones in my opinion, purely because he was able to blend in and fly under the radar like a normal person, with nobody, not even his family, having any clue that he was as depraved as he was. Now, John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago, Illinois on March 17th, 1942, as the second of three children and the only boy to John Gacy Sr. and Marion Elaine Robinson. Now, on his paternal side, his family had immigrated from what was at the time Prussia, now known as Poland, to the United States prior to the First World War. His father was a repair machinist and a World War I veteran, while his mom stayed at home like was typical in that time. As a child, things kind of started to get bad. On the outside, it looked pretty normal, but in private, the father, or Gacy Sr., was a severe alcoholic and would beat his family members and berate them on a constant basis. It was something that had become normal, to the point where it's some of John Wayne Gacy's earliest memories. Initially, anyways, he was overweight and unathletic to begin with, so he was going to get picked on by children, and his father was probably not very happy about that, being a vet. But the first memory that he has, that he's talked about, was when he was 4 years old, and he accidentally disarranged a car engine components that his dad had already assembled, and it resulted in him being beaten with a leather belt. Not very nice to begin with, but there's more. One other occasion, he remembers being beat over the head with a broomstick until he was unconscious. Again, not a very good sign, and not a very good way to start out childhood. The last one that I'll bring up in the earliest years was when he stole a toy truck from a neighborhood store, and when his mother found out, he made him walk back to that store and give it back. Whilst he was doing that, his mother had told his father, and his father ended up obviously punishing him for that with a belt again. After this point, his mother would try and protect John as much as she could, but that would only result in being called a sissy, and something very specific that he remembers. He was told he was a mama's boy and would probably grow up queer. That's a little bit of foreshadowing for everybody on exactly what goes down later on. And no matter how this stuff gone on, Gacy never said that he hated his father or he had any ill will towards his father. He constantly wanted his attention, but was never good enough in the eyes of his father. In 1949, he had another really bad incident after he and another boy were caught fondling another young girl. And his father ended up beating him with a razor strop, which is basically what you use to sharpen old school razors. So it's usually got some metal parts to it, and is leather with some wood to it on some cases. But mostly metal and leather, which would obviously hurt. Unfortunately, it would just get worse. And in the same year, a contractor that was a family friend and would take Gacy for rides in his truck began molesting him. He never told his father about it because he probably wouldn't have been believed. And he was really afraid that his father would blame him for it, which is very typical of somebody who is the victim of abuse, whether they are a child or an adult. Because of a heart condition, which led to him being overweight, he couldn't do any sports at school. And in the 4th grade, he started experiencing blackouts to the point where he was hospitalized on occasion because of seizures, which got worse in 1957 with a burst appendix. That shit hurts. That's nothing to be complaining about. That's nothing to play about. Even if it's pretty much useless, it hurts like a motherfucker. He kind of estimates that between 14 and 18, he spent mostly a year, or almost a year, for this part of time. And it started to end up with a decline in his grades and him pulling away from his schoolwork, which was not something he did prior to. His father would say that this was the ploy to get attention and sympathy, and constantly accuse his son of faking conditions just so he can lay in a hospital bed and get away from school. The rest of his family and his friends never doubted any illnesses, but there wasn't any conclusive diagnosis as to why this stuff was happening. One of his friends can remember that there were many instances where Gacy Sr. would ridicule or beat his son out of nowhere for no apparent reason. He'd also witnessed when the father began shouting at his son for no reason and began hitting him, with the mother trying to intervene. He recalled that Gacy put up his hands to defend himself, but he never fought back. Which goes back to him adoring his father and wanting his approval and affection, no matter how much he ridiculed and beat him. Which is very sad, in all honesty. But it doesn't make me feel bad for him later on. He started to kind of get into his later career that he became most known for in 1960 when he was 18. He started being involved in politics and worked as an assistant precinct captain for a Democratic Party candidate in his neighborhood. This got him more criticism from his father, and he was called a patsy for it. It was later speculated that he may have done this in an attempt to seek acceptance from others, where he had never received it from his father. So he's looking for acceptance elsewhere, when the one person he really wants to impress doesn't want anything to do with him, hates him no matter what he does. Once he got involved, in the same year that he got involved, his father bought him a car, and he kept that title in his own name until Gacy Jr., I guess you could say, finished paying for it, which took several monthly payments for years until he actually got it in his name, which also led to his father being able to take his keys away when he was fighting back, and another way of controlling him when he mouthed off, or even when he wasn't mouthing off. It was just a way of controlling him. Hey Fa, hey Mike, Yeah, thanks for getting that out for me, Alex. I really appreciate it. Gacy ended up like buying a bunch of extra keys so he could still use his car after the original set was taken away. Yes, he had major family problems. It got to the point where when his father found out about this stuff, he took the cap off of the distributor and kept it for 3 days straight, which made Gacy feel really sick and drained. So he basically was torturing his kid because he mouthed off. That's kind of fucked up. As soon as that cap was replaced, Gacy left and moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, where he started working with an ambulance service before he ended up working as an attendant at Palm Mortuary. As an attendant, he slept on a cot behind the embalming room just so he could have somewhere to sleep. He worked there for about 3 months, observing how morticians embalmed bodies, and he later confessed that when alone one evening, he got into a coffin of a deceased teenage kid and just laid with him like you would a lover. He's caressing him, he's hugging him, and it was kind of shocking to him, I guess. He ended up calling his mother and asking if his father would let him come home at that point because he was kind of afraid of what was happening to him emotionally. And he did end up going back to Chicago to live with his family again. Once he did that, he enrolled in a Northwestern Business College, even though he failed out of high school multiple times to the point where he went to 4 different high schools and still couldn't get a GED or didn't graduate from high school. However, he did graduate from college in 1963 and took a management trainee position with the Nunn Bush Shoe Company. He was transferred 4 years later to the Springfield, Illinois area to work as a salesman and was promoted to the manager of his department because he was doing so well. This is when he also met, I believe, his first wife, Marilyn Myers, who was a co-worker. And while they were dating, he joined the local JCs and was a real big worker for helping that organization politically, to the point where he was named a key man in April of 1964. And again, he had another brush with the closeted homosexuality that he was experiencing when one of his colleagues gave him a bunch of drinks and invited him to come spend the night on his sofa. The colleague ended up blowing him while he was completely wasted, which is probably traumatizing, especially if you're not okay with being gay at this point. Hi, Felix. Good to see you, man. So even with that, he continued to kind of climb in the ranks with work and ended up being the president of his little group or community. And he was named an outstanding member in the state of Illinois. So he got a lot of recognition for his work, even though he was internally having a lot of problems. And as I referred to earlier, Gacy and Myers did marry in September of 1964, where her father ended up purchasing 3 of the KFC restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. So they ended up moving over there to manage those restaurants, with the understanding that they would be working in his in-laws' home, which they kind of left so the couple could take over. Yeah, a workaholic is obsessive to the point where you can kind of see where that obsessiveness comes from. Because of that, he was getting $15,000 a year, which is almost $120,000 as of this year, plus profits of the restaurant's share, which is a lot of money. So he was basically pretty wealthy at the time. he ended up relocating to Waterloo with his wife and opened a club in his basement for employees to come drink alcohol and play pool. So he obviously was building up some sort of rapport with his employees. He employed a lot of teenagers to work the restaurants, both girls and boys, but he really only socialized with the boys, giving them alcohol before he would make sexual advances towards them. And if they were rebuffed, he would just claim it was a joke and he was testing their moral character. So, hey, you wanna have sex? Oh, no. Oh, I was just kidding, man. I was just joshing you. Yeah, that totally is believable. Mm-hmm. In 1966, they had their first child, a son, and a next daughter, or a daughter later in the next year. And he described this period of his life as being perfect, where he actually did earn his father's approval. He visited his parents in 1966, where he got something really big from his father. He'd said, "Son, I was wrong about you." So he's basically apologizing for everything he had done. And that it validated a lot of stuff for Gacy. Thanks. Thanks, Alex. I'm trying. I'm really trying. It's easier to bounce off other people, but, you gotta keep going. He again joined the Jaycees in Waterloo and offered extended hours to the organization with the 12 to 14-hour days he worked managing the 3 restaurants. So he was constantly working. And although he was considered ambitious, he kind of was held in high regard for doing so much fundraising. Hi, Mystic. Yeah, Killer Clowns. Fundraising, to the point where he was called an outstanding vice president by the Jaycees. In one of these meetings, they would often kind of call him the Colonel, like Colonel Sanders. And in the same year he was named outstanding vice president, he ended up serving as the board of directors for that organization. And apparently they were really into wife swapping, prostitution, pornography, and drug use, which obviously he was involved in, and had apparent regular sex with prostitutes. That's not very good. That's not very healthy. I'm seeing a pattern here. It's not a good pattern, but it's a pattern. In August of 67, he had his first known sexual assault of a teenage boy, who was 15-year-old Donald Voorhees, and was the son of a fellow Jaycee. He went to the kid's house, promising to show him, or he lured Voorhees to his home, promising to show him porn, and gave him a ton of alcohol before persuading him to give him oral sex. And he would continue to do the same thing with other boys. Along with one that Gacy encouraged him to have sex with his own wife before blackmailing him into performing oral sex with him. So he basically went and said that the kid could fuck his wife and then used it against him so that he could get what he wanted from the kid. That's fucked up. They were also several teenage boys that got paid $50 each to do homosexual experience in the interest of quote-unquote scientific research. The fuck. The ever-loving fuck. This kind of came crashing down a little bit in March of 1968 when Voorhees finally did report that Gacy was assaulting him. And his dad immediately went to the police, which is when Gacy first got, arrested. And he was charged with performing oral sodomy and the attempted sexual assault of a 16-year-old named Edward Lynch. He denied the hell out of it and demanded to take a polygraph test in order to get out of that. Though he did take the test, it indicated that he was lying in relation to both of the young men. So he got a test that he vehemently wanted and failed it epically. That's very counterintuitive. That's not smart at all. He continued to deny that any of this happened, and he kept saying that this was politically motivated because the father of Voorhees, or Voorhees Sr., was not a fan of Gacy being nominated for the president of the JCs. And though he was charged and he fucked up on the polygraph test, a lot of the people he worked with in that organization continued to support him. No matter how that went, he was still indicted in May 10th of 1968 for the sodomy charge. Then later on that year, he started to persuade some of his employees, one of which was 18-year-old Russell Schroeder, to attack Voorhees in an effort to keep him from testifying. He promised him $300 to lure Voorhees to a secluded spot and spray him in the face with mace before beating the living shit out of him. He agreed, and in early September, he did commit the act of spraying him in the face with mace and beating the living shit out of him. However, this backfired because Voorhees managed to escape and went to the police, which met him to identifying Schroeder, who got arrested. And even though he had said he wasn't involved, he ended up confessing to it and saying he was hired by Gacy in order to make Voorhees not want to go and testify on the sodomy charges. In September of that same year, he had to go under psychiatric evaluation at the psychiatric hospital of the State University of Illinois, and when 2 doctors examined him for 17 days, they ended up saying he had antisocial personality disorder, which comes into the whole sociopath-psychopath characterization. And they said that he wouldn't get anything beneficial out of therapy or being medicated because his pattern was going to lead him to repeated conflict with society. He was kind of a menace, and they knew it from the get. And that ended up saying that he was very competent to stand trial. So he ended up going, fuck, I can't do anything about this in November 7th of that year, and pleaded guilty to one of the sodomy charges for Voorhees, but not guilty to the other kids that he assaulted. He said that Voorhees had offered to have sex with them, and he acted out of curiosity. But that was not believable, obviously. I wouldn't believe that. I don't think any competent person would believe that. So he ended up being convicted and in December and was sentenced to 10 years of in prison, which he served at Anamosa State Penitentiary. And another chain effect to that is that his first wife filed for divorce the same day he was convicted. And she wanted to be awarded the couple's home and property, along with sole custody of the 2 kids and alimony, which the court gave her. And everything was finalized in September of the next year. And because of this, he never saw his first wife or his kids ever again. He was basically cut the fuck out. which he deserved, absolutely. And ooh, what was this? Sorry, I made the stupid decision of not pulling up Streamlabs earlier. Duh, I knew I was missing something. Thank you, Conspiracy, for subscribing. It is much appreciated. While Gacy was in prison, he started getting the reputation of being a model prisoner, and even within a couple of months, he ended up being the head cook at the penitentiary, along with joining the JC chapter and increasing the membership from 50 to 650 men in less than 18 months. So he basically conned all these people into liking him, which is a phenomenal thing in of itself. Somebody had to have a shit ton of charisma to get that to happen, because that's what, over 100 times the number that there was. He got an increase in the inmates' daily pay from the prison hall, and had supervised several projects to improve the conditions in the prison. So he's basically doing everything he can to look good for when he gets out and kind of save himself, since he's convicted of being a pedophile. And pedophiles are hated the most in prison. So if he hadn't gotten himself into this position, he'd probably be dead in prison. And in 1969, he applied for parole, or early release, but was denied, and ended up going again in 1970 after completing 16 high school courses and getting his diploma in 1969. Another big thing happened that year. On Christmas Day, Gacy Sr. died of cirrhosis of the liver. And when Gacy got the news, he was reported to have just broken down completely and would collapse on the floor sobbing. Because of this, he asked for supervised compassionate leave to go to his father's funeral. But he didn't get to go, which probably was extremely detrimental to him mentally and emotionally. He ended up getting granted parole with 12 months probation on June 18th of 1970 after serving 18 months of the 10-year sentence. So he didn't even serve... He's barely served maybe like a tenth of his sentence, which, for being what he was, is kind of fucked up. But he did have two conditions of his parole and probation. He had to relocate to Chicago to live with his mother, and he had a 10 p.m. curfew. And the board of parole would get regular updates on what was going on in his progress. He ended up telling another JC member, Clarence Lane, who was the one that picked him up from prison. It was like a steadfast friend and someone who backed him up for his innocence. He said he would never go to jail again and wanted to reestablish himself in Waterloo. But 24 hours after the release, he'd gone to Chicago to live with his mom. And shortly after that, he got a job as a short order cook at a restaurant. So he started from the bottom again. But it didn't last very long, because in February 1971, he got charged with the sexual assault of a teenage boy who said that he lured him into his car at the Chicago Greyhound bus terminal, took him to his home, and then attempted to force him into having sex with him. However, this was dismissed because the boy didn't show up to court for the complaint. And the Iowa Board of Parole never heard about this. which is something that would completely violate his parole. So he was allowed to go 8 months later and get his parole ended, along with his previous records and convictions in Iowa being completely sealed. Got away with it again in some form or fashion. He ended up buying a house with the help of his mom in the near village of Norridge in the Norwood Park Township, which is an unincorporated area of Cook County in Chicago. The address is 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. And he ended up staying there until he was arrested in 1978 again, which is also where he committed all of his murders, he says. And once again, he continued his pattern of being an active member of society in his community. His neighbors loved him. He loaned his tools and all of his stuff to plow snow from the neighborhood free of charge. And he hosted annual parties that hundreds of people would attend, including politicians. So he schmoozed his way up to the top once again. In 1971, after he moved into the house and had his mother moved in, he ended up getting engaged with another woman and his second wife, Carol Hoff, who was a divorcee already with 2 daughters. He dated her briefly in high school, and that's how he knew her eventually. He was a friend, or she had become a friend of his younger sister as well, so he knew her with family ties. He had them all move into the house after everything was announced that they were getting married, and his mother moved out after the wedding in 1972. Another fun little pattern is that 1 week before his wedding on June 22nd, 1972, he was arrested and charged with the battery and reckless conduct, which was a response to a complaint another kid filed against Gacy, saying that he'd shown a sheriff's badge, lured him into the car, and forced him to have oral sex. Once again, these charges were dropped, and the complainant attempted to blackmail Gacy, apparently, and that helped with getting it dropped and him not being convicted or actually charged, which I'm pretty sure he probably did do, seeing as it kind of fits his MO. He ended up establishing a part-time construction business named PDM Contractors, which is short for painting, decorating, and maintenance. And with the approval of his probation officer, he'd work evenings on construction contracts while he worked as a cook during the day. Again, booking himself with everything when it comes to work and anything around the community. He'd do minor repair work, like sign writing, pouring concrete, redecorating, and then he later started to get more income and more customers to do interior design, remodeling, and all that good stuff that you do when you're a successful construction company or contractor. He ended up quitting the job as a cook because things became so profitable and committed completely to this business. And by around 1975, he ended up working up to 16 hours a day and became a supervisor for PE Systems, which specialized in remodeling drugstores. So between that, he worked up to 4 projects at a time and was always moving through other states. And by the time it was 1978 when the year he got arrested, his company made over $200,000 a year, which is probably millions by our standards today with inflation. Now, because he worked this kind of business, a lot of his workforce were students and young men. And he propositioned these kids and guys for sex and would insist on getting that in return for lending them vehicles, helping them with finances, or giving them promotion. So it's a quid pro quo thing he kind of lured them into. He also claimed to own guns and told an employee by the name of Arthur Peterson, "Do you know how easy it would be to get one of my guns and kill you? And how easy it would be to get rid of the body?" I'd probably be shitting bricks at that point. In 1973, he and a PDM employee went to Florida to view a property that Gacy had purchased, and in the first night, he raped the employee in the hotel room. When they got back to Chicago, he took him to his home and then beat him in the yard, telling his wife that he'd been attacked for refusing to pay the employee for poor quality work. Interesting. So he raped the guy, and then... I'm sorry, I read that wrong. The guy beat him, and he used that as an excuse so that he'd get away with whatever he was doing. Another instance of this was in 1975 when he hired a 15-year-old by the name of Anthony Antonucci. I don't even know. It's called Charisma. It's called Charisma, Maddie. It really is. That shit can get you through a lot of bullshit. But in July of 1975, he went to the kid's house. They drank a bottle of wine and watched a stag film before they started wrestling on the floor, and Gacy cuffed his hands behind his back. Because one cuff was loose, the kid was able to free his arm and get out of the room. He was attacked by the kid and got put on the floor so he could get the handcuff key, and then cuffed Gacy's hands behind his back. So he basically took over because he was a high school wrestler and he was stronger than Gacy. At first, Gacy started threatening Antonucci for that, and then calmed down and promised to leave if he would remove the handcuffs. Which he did when Antonucci agreed to take the cuffs off. He later said, "Not only are you the only one who got out of the cuffs, you got them on me." And that's from Gacy, which is very chilling, to say the least. Another instance was in 1976 when he picked up an 18-year-old David Cram, who was hitchhiking on Elston Avenue, and Gacy offered him a job, which he began working the same evening, and then the next month he invited Cram to his house, dressed as Poe the Clown, and conned Cram into putting handcuffs on. Because Cram was drunk, he kind of let him do it, and Gacy put his hands in front of his body when he cuffed him. Gacy then swung the guy around, holding the chain that was linked to the cuffs, and said flat out, I'm gonna rape you, kid." Cram was able to kick Gacy in the face and got out of the handcuffs, but a month later, he showed up in Cram's bedroom door and said, "Dave, you really don't know who I am. Maybe it would be good if you give me what I want." And when he resisted and tackled Gacy to the ground, Gacy would say, "You ain't no fun," and then left. Because of this incident, Cram moved and quit the company. Though, for some god-awful reason, God knows, he would work for Gacy kind of periodically for the next 2 years. So basically up until the time he got arrested. as soon as Cram moved out, because apparently he was living in Gacy's house. Interesting. He got another kid to come in, and that person ended up living with him until 1977. Ooh. Back to politics. He, again, was active in Democratic Party politics at this point. And he usually used his employees to clean apartment headquarters with no charge to kind of put more rapport in his pocket. He would again get lots of awards. He was appointed the director of the annual Polish Constitution Day Parade, and he would supervise that event for 3 years from 1975 to 1978. He ended up meeting and was photographed with First Lady Rosalind Carter. So he basically got to meet the president's wife in 1978. And she sent a photo to him that said, "To John Gacy, best wishes, Rosalind Carter." Ooh, I bet she didn't know. I bet she regrets that now. It later ended up being kind of like an embarrassment to the United Secret Services, and Gacy was seen wearing an S-pin, which indicated he was somebody that was given special clearance by the Secret Service. So they basically fucked up, is what they're saying. On top of this, and this is where the whole clown thing came in, he started working as a clown in the Moose Club. And he became aware of a clown named Jolly Joker, who regularly performed at fundraising events and parades, in addition to entertaining hospitalized children. So he ended up joining the Jolly Jokers in 1975 and created Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown so that he could perform at these events and gain more clout or padding to keep him from getting caught for anything. Because of all this, he was known as the Killer Clown. This is obviously where that came from. And he would stay in his clown garb after the performance and would show up at somewhere he really liked to drink, the Good Luck Lounge, in that garb, saying he performed at an event and was stopping for a drink before going home. But this was more therapeutic for Gacy, or cathartic, I guess you could say, because he said later on that being a clown allowed him to regress into childhood. So he could have a good time in his mind as a child where he didn't in his actual childhood. He got divorced again in 1975 when he finally admitted to his wife he was bisexual. And then after Mother's Day, they had, which is really fucked up, they had sex on Mother's Day, and then after that, he said that was the last time they were ever having sex. Which he kept to, and he spent most nights away from home, and would show up saying he was working late. His wife had said specifically she remembered seeing him bring teenage boys into the garage and found gay porn and men's wallets with identifications inside the house later on. And when she confronted Gacy about this, he told her it was none of her business. Like, what? So, this resulted in a bunch of arguments, and when she ended up failing to balance a checkbook correctly in October 1975, that was basically like the last straw, and she wanted a divorce, which he agreed to. But weirdly enough, she continued to live in that house until 1976 before taking her daughters and leaving to her own apartment. Uh, so yeah, that's he was full on gay and had a hard time coping with it. Now, with all that in mind, we're gonna get to the meat and potatoes of this, and that's the murders. If you notice with the thumbnail, if it posted right, you'll see pictures of all of the known victims, of which there are 33 at least, with 26 of them found buried under the crawl space in Gacy's house. He would usually abduct his victims from the Greyhound bus station like he'd done before, or the Bughouse Square, or just off the streets. Some of them were coerced or conned, thinking he was like a sheriff because he had spotlights on his black Oldsmobile. So he was basically setting up to be a cop or look like a cop. And some were just forced in. Some of them he lured into his house with the promise of a job or an offer of drinks or money or to have sex. And he'd usually do it with one person, but on several occasions he did what he called doubles, which means that he had two people that he murdered in the same evening. Fuck all that. Fuck this guy. Ugh. They would say that his usual MO or modus operandi was to get the kid drunk with either alcohol or drugs, and then gain his trust before he would produce handcuffs to do a magic trick, which is part of his clown routine. He would cuff their hands behind their back and then would release himself with a key, which he had hid between his fingers. So he shows that, and then he tells the victim, or offers the victim, the option to do the same thing and show him how to do it. And once they were cuffed and couldn't get away, he would say, this trick is, you have to have the key. And he called that the handcuff trick. Once that was done, he would end up raping and torturing his captive. He would usually sit on their chest and force the victim to suck on him. We'll say that. We'll just say that. He would burn them with cigars. He would make them imitate a horse and sit on their back with makeshift reins on their necks. He'd use foreign objects and prescription bottles to sodomize them, meaning he put it up their butt. He also liked to immobilize their legs before he started doing this. Usually because he would use 2x4 with handcuffs attached to each end, which he got from the Houston mass murders. Yeah, there's a pattern of serial killers being influenced by other serial killers, and that's fucking disgusting by my standards, but this is what the guy does. He would drag or force them to crawl into his bathroom, where he would proceed to drown them and revive them, and drown them and revive them, so he can continue to assault them and torture them. He would then finally end the problem by making a tourniquet out of rope around their neck, and then slowly tightening the rope with a hammer handle, which he called the rope trick. And he would normally say at this point, or at least frequently, he would say, this is the last trick. So even killing them was torture. Fuck that guy. Sometimes he would do the most hypocritical shit, like reading the 23rd Psalm while he was tightening the rope on their neck. He said that the victim would convulse for an hour or two before dying. even if the victims died from asphyxiation by cloth gags that were stuffed deep into their throat. The only thing that was different was for his final two victims. And with the exception of those two, he normally would kill these kids between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So he had a very distinct pattern. And once he'd committed the murder, he would store their bodies in his bed for 24 hours. Probably like he did with the corpse in the coffin, where he first started having the inclination that he was gay. He would then put them under his crawl space and poured quicklime to kind of get them to decompose faster. Some of them, though, he would take to the garage and embalm them before he buried them. And it's suspected that he may have committed acts of necrophilia with several of his victims before they were actually buried under the crawl space. Oh god, I feel so bad for these people. Ugh, it was gross. I mean, I knew it was gross to begin with, but this is just nasty. This, as far as we know, started in January of 1972. Following a family party, he went to the Civic Center in the Chicago Loop, and he wanted to look at the ice sculptures before he met a 16-year-old named Timothy Jack McCoy from the Greyhound bus terminal, which he liked to go to. Apparently McCoy was traveling from Michigan to Nebraska, and Gacy got the kid into his car and took him on a sightseeing tour before going to his home, saying that he would be able to spend the night, and then he'd be able to be taken back to the bus station to catch the bus he was going for. And prior to them actually getting his identification and confirming who he was, they called him the Greyhound bus boy. Very sad, in all honesty. With this particular person, Gacy has claimed to have woken up early the following morning to find McCoy standing in his bedroom door with the kitchen knife in his hand. He jumped from his bed, and McCoy raised both arms in a gesture of surrender, tilting the knife upwards and accidentally cutting his forearms. Gacy twisted the knife from McCoy, from what he's saying, banged his head against the bedroom wall, kicked him against his wardrobe, and walked towards him. McKay was still beating the shit out of him. Or he got kicked in the stomach, so he's getting the shit kicked out of him. Before Gacy grabbed him, wrestled him to the floor, and then stabbed the living crap out of him while he was sitting on his chest. He also claims that he washed the knife as McCoy was dying on his floor, bleeding out, and then went to the kitchen and saw an open carton of eggs and a slab of unsliced bacon on the kitchen table. So it looks like he'd set it up for a table for two, and he apparently came in with the kitchen knife because he was making them breakfast. Interesting. He ended up burying him in the crawl space and covered him in concrete so that he was harder to find. Gacy later would say that he, immediately after killing the kid, he felt totally drained. And he would talk about listening to the kid lying there, grasping for air, with what he called gurgulations. And he apparently had an orgasm so mind-numbing during the murder. And added, "That's when I realized that death was the ultimate thrill." What? What the fuck? What the fuck? God damn. The second victim is not identified, but It's thought that he died in January of 1974, with Gacy strangling him and putting him in the closet before he was buried. Gacy later stated that the bodily fluids leaked from his mouth and nose and was staining the carpet, so he would regularly stuff cloth, rags, underwear in the rest of his victim's mouth to prevent that leakage from happening again. 1 week after the attempted assault of Antonucci, in July, Gacy got another one of his employees, which was 19-year-old from Lombard, Illinois, by the name of John Butkovich. Butkovich? I don't know how to say that. Kid disappeared, and his car was found just abandoned with his wallet, jacket, and keys still in the car, keys being in the ignition. Before he disappeared, he confronted Gacy over 2 weeks of outstanding back pay, and his dad would call Gacy, claiming he was happy to help search for his son, and was sorry that he ran away. Which is another thing that's common with serial killers. Oh, you're gonna tweet the first 2 videos to Tommy? Oh, that would be great. If he does like it, that's fantastic. Hopefully I'll have another one out at the end of the week. Hopefully, cross our fingers. Work's a bitch. So he basically caused the murder of this guy's kid and then played the good citizen and went to go look for him. Which is fucked up, among other things. It's gross. It's gross the level of depravity you have to have in order to do this kind of shit. I don't get it. It ceases to amaze me how fucked up these people can be. And it's exactly why I say there's no point in trying to logically rationalize why these people do what they do. Anyway. Apparently, when he was questioned by the police, Gacy had said that Butkovich and a couple of friends arrived at his house looking for the overdue pay, and they'd reached a compromise, and then left. But for 3 following years, the kid's parents would call the police over 100 times and kept saying, "Look at this guy. Please investigate this guy. Something is not right here." Gacy later admitted that he encountered him exiting his car at the corner of West Lawrence Avenue, which was probably close by his house. And he waved at him to get his attention. And according to Gacy, kid came to his car and said, "I want to talk to you." Got in his car and went back to his home to try and settle the overdue wages issue. Once there, he offered him a drink and then did the cuff trick. And he was said directly, quote unquote, he sat on the kid's chest for a while before he strangled him. And after that, he put him in the garage, intending to put it in the crawl space, but his wife and stepdaughters came home earlier than he expected, and he had to bury the body under the concrete floor in the garage. More of this came up in 1975 when he apparently started to kill more young kids, or asked for sex more often from young boys. And he called those his cruising years. That was when he was cruising. And a lot of these murders were committed in this time, which was between 1976 and 1978. And because he largely lived alone during his divorce, it was easy for him to do these things and not get caught. Of course, he remained gregarious, and he kept helping the community. And he seemed completely alright, except for the neighbors noticed him being more erratic since the divorce. Which included seeing him more often with young males with him. Hearing him travel to and from his house early in the morning, and seeing the lights in his home switch on and off really early in the morning as well. Another neighbor had said that he would hear muffled, high-pitched screaming, shouting, or crying, and woke up with her son in the morning hours for several years. So she was hearing this. And she said that the sounds emanated from the house adjacent to theirs on Somerdale Avenue. So she was hearing this shit happening. Holy fuck. That was me. I would feel more than horrified by this stuff. Everything kind of resumed with the murders and kidnapping in 1976 when he abducted and murdered another 18-year-old named Daryl Sampson. The last time he was seen alive was in Chicago, April 6, 1976. So what he did was he got rid of him and then buried him under the dining room with some cloth lodged in his throat. So he basically had bodies under the entirety of his house for the most part. Fucking gross. 5 weeks later, he picked up 15-year-old Randall Reffitt, who was walking home from high school, strangled him, or suffocated him to death, and buried his body under the crawl space. And just hours after that, he picked up 14-year-old Samuel Stapleton as he was walking home from his sister's apartment. So investigators did confirm that both of them were killed in the same day. So this was one of his doubles, quote unquote. In June, he picked up a 17-year-old teenager, Michael Bonin, who disappeared while traveling from Chicago to Waukegan, Illinois. So he captured him, strangled him with a ligature, and buried him under the spare bedroom. 10 days after that, he got another one, a 16-year-old William Carroll, which he buried in a common grave in the crawl space. So another one in the crawl space. He was also the first of 4 victims to have been murdered between the 13th of June and August 6th, 1976. 3 were between the ages of 16 and 17, and one of them was unidentified and looks to be an adult. On the 5th, he picked up 16-year-old James Hackinson, which is the other of the 3, who was last known to have phoned his family. So he basically picked him up after he called his parents or his family, murdered him, and buried him under the crawl space beneath the body of another boy he picked up that was 17 at the time, named Rick Johnston. So he killed another 2 around the same time. So he was getting more erratic after the divorce, meaning he was kicking everything up more. It is thought that he killed another 2 people between August and October of 1976. One of which was, well, they're both believed to be friends. So he got 2 at the same time. Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino. that were last seen outside of a restaurant in Chicago. 2 days later, 19-year-old William Bundy disappeared after saying he was going to a party. He was suffocated to death and buried beneath the master bedroom because apparently he worked for Gacy. In December, he got another employee of his, 17-year-old Gregory Godsick, whose girlfriend said she last saw him outside of her house after he'd driven her home after a date. He'd only been working for Gacy for 3 weeks before he just poofed. And he had told his family that Gacy had him dig trenches of some kind of drain tiles, or for some kind of drain tiles, in this crawl space. So he basically had him digging graves in his crawl space before he killed him. And his car was found abandoned in Niles, Illinois. Gacy was contacted after that, and he said that the kid ran away from home, and said that he wanted to do so. He also said he got an answering machine message from Godsick shortly after he disappeared, asking if he could play back. But when he was asked about playing it back by the parents, Gacy said he'd already erased it. Liar. Liar. Big fucking liar. The next victim was in 1977, a 19-year-old by the name of John Sick, who knew Botvich, Godsick, and Gacy. He was lured into Gacy's house with the pretext of selling his Plymouth satellite, Gacy buying a car from him, and which Gacy took and later sold to a Michael Rossi for $300. Fun. Between December of 1976 and March of 1977, he killed another unidentified male and buried him under his crawl space, beneath the body of another 20-year-old by the name of John Prestige, who disappeared on the 15th of March. Prestige had mentioned to his acquaintances that he got work from a local contractor, but obviously that had to be Gacy that offered him the job. Authorities couldn't figure out how he died, but he was apparently buried in the crawl space right underneath the room he used as an office. So literally everywhere in the house had a body under it. Imagine having to dig all that shit out. Oh, God. He got another unidentified youth that he buried in the crawl space in spring or early summer of that year. But the exact time, it hasn't been determined. In July, he got another kid named Matthew Bowman that was 19 years old, and apparently picked him up from a suburban train station where he was last seen. A month later, Michael Rossi was arrested for stealing gasoline from a service station after he bought the car that John Six was murdered for, I guess. And the attendant noted that the license plate would go back to Gacy's house. So when he got questioned about that, he said that he sold the car to him in February because he needed money to leave town. Funnily enough, the VIN number to the car still was registered to Sick. And even with all of that, the police didn't go after Gacy. I don't understand. By the end of the year, he apparently had murdered 6 more men between the ages of 16 and 21. The first of which was 18-year-old Robert Gilroy, who was the son of the Chicago police sergeant. Oh, geez. Apparently, Gilroy lived 4 blocks from Gacy, and he was murdered and buried in the crawl space, like most of the others. Gacy had flown to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to kind of observe a remodeling project, and because he was in another state around the time that Gilroy was last seen, he wasn't suspected of being the killer. It's apparently believed, and this is one of the reasons why they believe it, is that he had accomplices for this and a couple other homicides. After that, 19-year-old former Marine John Mowry disappeared, leaving his mother's house to walk to his apartment. He was apparently strangled and buried under the master bedroom. On October, 21-year-old Russell Nelson was taken from a local bar. He was apparently looking for work when Gacy grabbed him, which is another reason, or another corroboration of how he got people into his home to be murdered. 4 weeks after that, he got another 16-year-old Robert Winch. In November, he got Tommy Bowling, a 20-year-old, from a Chicago bar. After that, in December, he got another U.S. Marine that was 19, named David Talsma. And he was apparently strangled with a ligature and buried in the crawl space close to the body of John Mowry. In December, he got 19-year-old student Robert Donnelly from a bus stop at gunpoint, took him home, raped him, tortured him, and repeatedly dunked his head into the bathtub until he passed out. He apparently taunted him with statements such as, "Aren't we playing fun games tonight?" Fuck this guy. He apparently didn't die. He got away. And he later said that he'd asked Gacy to kill him, and the response was, "I'm getting around to it." But he was finally just driven home and told him if he went to the police, they're not going to believe him. This guy just keeps getting more fucked by the minute. Donnelly did end up reporting the assault, and Gacy was questioned on January 6, 1978. He admitted to having some kind of dominatrix sex slave relationship with the guy, and kept saying that everything that was happening was consensual. Also saying he didn't pay the kid the money he promised him. And again, the police believed him and didn't give him any charges. His next kill was 19-year-old William Kindred, and he was the final victim that was put in the crawl space. So after this, there aren't any more crawl space victims. In March of 1978, he got 26-year-old Jeffrey Ringel into his car, chloroformed him, drove him to his house, and restrained his arms to a pillory device affixed to the ceiling. It gets worse. He apparently raped and tortured Rignall with various different instruments, including candles, whips, and repeatedly chloroformed him into unconsciousness. He thought that he'd killed the kid, so he dropped him off as a dump victim in Lincoln Park in Chicago, and the chloroform had apparently damaged his liver to an extent. He ended up going to his girlfriend's apartment, and police were informed about the assault, but once again, didn't go after Gacy. I can't fucking can't fucking at all. I just can't. I just fucking can't with this. Like, god damn it. And he recalls seeing the Oldsmobile, Kennedy Expressway, and some side streets. He ended up with a couple friends staking out the expressway, where his girlfriend saw the Oldsmobile, and they tailed him to Gacy's house. An arrest warrant was issued for Gacy, and he was arrested on July 15th, 1978, with the trial being for the battery against Rignall. And because the crawlspace had no room for more bodies, he confessed that he considered stowing them in his attic, but worried about the complications arising from excessive leakage. Gross. He said one had landed on a passing barge. Only 4 bodies were ever found. Oof. So he started throwing victims off of bridges and just disposing of that way. One of them was found from the I-55 bridge in the Des Plaines River, which was 20-year-old Timothy O'Rourke. He'd been killed in mid-June after going to purchase cigarettes. And apparently he was offered a job as well. In November, Gacy killed 19-year-old Frank Landingen, and his naked body was found in that same river later that month. 12 years after that body was found, or 12 days after that body was found, he got a 20-year-old James Mazzara, and who had just had Thanksgiving dinner with his family, and told his sister he was working in the construction industry and doing all right. That's great. God. Jesus. This guy just, I can't understand how easily he was able to get away with this shit. I can't even. Apparently, he was talking to the store owner of a local pharmacy, within earshot of an employee, Robert Piest. Can't remember. I don't know exactly how to pronounce that. And he was overheard mentioning that he hired teenage boys for $5 an hour, which is double what he was getting at the pharmacy. And apparently, Piest's mother got to the store, and he asked his mother to wait, saying that some contractor talked to me about a job. He left and apparently went to Gacy's home, where he was murdered. Gacy later admitted that Piest asked whether there was anything he wouldn't do for the right price, and Piest replied he didn't mind working hard. So apparently he misunderstood what he was asking, and he was told that he would make good money, and Piest was really dismissive of that, so he's starting to catch on. Gacy did the cuff trick on him and said, "I'm gonna rape you, and you can't do anything about it," which made the kid cry, weeping. He admitted that he put a tourniquet around his neck, and Piest was just crying hysterically because he was terrified, obviously. And he apparently, and this is fucking a cherry on the fucked up sundae, he got a business call from one of his acquaintances while Peace was suffocating on his bedroom floor. And this apparently is what really got the police involved in going after Gacy. He was really first investigated by a cop, Lieutenant Joseph Kozenczak, who had a son, who was a schoolmate with Priest. And after speaking to the kid's mother, he was convinced that the kid did not run away from home. Because of that, he checked his background, Gacy's background, and found out that he had an outstanding battery charge in Chicago and served that sentence in Iowa for sodomy. So that just red flag everywhere. Easily red flag. He ended up going with a couple of officers to Gacy's home that night. And Gacy was trying to get out of it by saying that he saw a couple of kids working at the pharmacy. And he asked one of them whether or not there were any remodeling supplies in the store. He said that he had not offered Priest's job and returned to the pharmacy after 8 p.m. as he left his appointment book at the store. He promised to come to the station later and make a statement saying he wasn't able to do so at the moment because his uncle had died. He asked when he could come, and he responded with, "You guys are very rude. Don't you have any respect for the dead?" The fuck exactly. He finally showed up at 3:20 a.m. the next day, and he was covered in mud, saying that he'd been involved in a car accident. A minor car accident en route to his appointment with the officers, after apparently disposing of Peace's body. So he basically took that time in between when they first show up and then showing up to the police station to get rid of the body so that he wouldn't further incriminate himself. He said that his vehicle slid off an ice-covered road and he tried to free himself from the vehicle without success before it had to be towed. And he returned later that day saying he had no involvement in Priest's disappearance. Yeah, he's got big huevos, this dude. He continued to say he didn't give him a job, and he asked him why he'd gone back to the pharmacy. He said that he gotten a phone call from the owner and that his appointment book was at the store, who denied even calling Gacy. So they'd already known that he was gonna lie. He prepared a statement detailing the entire day of December 11th. But because they thought that Gacy was holding Peace in his home, they issued a warrant for his house 2 days later and started to search the property, only to find a bunch of really suspicious shit, including police badges, a 6mm Brevettata starter pistol inside an office drawer, and a syringe and hypodermic needle inside the cabinet in Gacy's room. They found handcuffs, books on homosexuality and pederasty, pornos, capsules of amyl nitrate, and an 18-inch dildo in Gacy's room. They also noted that there were 39-inch, 2x4s with holes drilled on each side, bottles of Valium and atropine, several driver's licenses that were in one of the bedrooms, a blue hooded parka on top of a toolbox in the laundry room, and underwear too small for Gacy in the bathroom closet. So they found shit everywhere. There's no way that if you got into that house, you would not know something was fucked up here. There's no way. They also found a Maine West High School ring that wasn't Peace's. It was a 1975 ring with the initials JAS. Whoo! On top of that, they got a photo from the Nissan, that pharmacy that started this whole bullshit, from a trash can, along with the 36-inch section of nylon rope. Yeah, 18. Gacy's not very smart. Well, he's smart outside of his home, but once you get into his house, he's fucked. Like, he was done. And because they found all this, they started to watch him, and they confiscated the Oldsmobile that he used along with other work vehicles. They basically took all of his shit and had 2 people monitoring Gacy at all times at a rotational 12-hour shift to see what the background was and what the involvement was with the Peace case. And they ended up getting a call the following day after that started from a Michael Rossi, who informed them that Godsick's disappearance and the fact that another PDM employee, Charles Hatula, had been found drowned in the Illinois River that year. Ooh, buddy. So, on the 15th, which is 4 days after the disappearance and murder of Pease, the investigators got more information on the battery charge and found out about how he lured Ringel into his car, or Rignall in his car, chloroformed, raped him, drugged him, burned his face severely, and then there was obviously sodomy with rectal bleeding in Lincoln Park the morning after that. They also interviewed his former wife, and that turned them on to the disappearance of Butkovich. All the dominoes are falling. And along with that, the ring ended up being traced back to Cizik. And the mother revealed several items in her son's apartment were missing, including a Motorola TV set. On the 16th, Gacy figured out that they were watching him and invited him in for meals in restaurants and drinks to the bar at his home. The bar at his home. So basically he was calling him out. Balls. Big fucking balls. And he kept denying every time that he had anything to do with the disappearance of Peace, and said that officers were harassing him due to political connections or recreational drug use. Interesting. He knew they weren't going to arrest him on anything trivial, so he'd taunt him all the time by saying talk about traffic laws, and kept losing his the people that trailing him on several occasions. Same afternoon, Cram did an interview. Oh yeah, shit's getting good. Where he described how Gacy was open-minded towards sex between males and his workaholic lifestyle. Also said, because of his poor timekeeping, Gacy gave him a watch, explained he had obtained it from a dead person. He literally told him he got the watch from a dead person. How stupid can you be? How stupid and arrogant can you be? Fuck. They did a formal interview of Michael Rossi on the 17th of that month, 6 days later and found out about the vehicle that Cizik initially owned was sold to him. And he said he bought the car because Cizik needed money to move to California. He also had his Oldsmobile looked at, and in the trunk, they found a small cluster of fibers that may have been human hair. Ooh! Ooh! They were sent for analysis, and they also conducted a drug test with German Shepherd dogs to see whether Piest had been present in the car. And when the dogs looked at the vehicles and they went towards the Oldsmobile, they lay on the passenger seat and basically signaled what they called a death reaction, which means that a body had been in that vehicle. Piest specifically. In response to that same evening, he invited the detectives to a restaurant for a meal. He also invited them in the early hours of the next morning to another restaurant for breakfast to talk business about his marriage and his activities as a clown. And during that, Gacy would say, "You know, clowns can get away with murder. Clowns can get away with murder." Apparently around this time, he started to lose his goddamn mind because of the surveillance. It was really starting to get to him. He wasn't shaving. He looked exhausted. He was extremely anxious and drinking heavily. So, him thinking it was a good idea, he went to his lawyer to prepare a $750,000 civil suit against the police department, telling him to cease and fucking desist. However, the photo receipt that was found in Gacy's kitchen the same day went and traced back to a 17-year-old Kim Byers, who was a colleague of Piest at the pharmacy. She admitted when she was contacted in person the following day, she'd worn a jacket to shield herself from the cold. She placed the receipt in the parka pocket before giving that coat to Piest. So basically, there's only one way that receipt could come into or be found in Gacy's house, and that's if Piest was there. And she even adamantly said that he lured Piest out of the store because he said, "The contractor guy wants to talk to me. I'll be right back." Gacy's fucked. He's literally fucked. Rossi was interviewed again and was more cooperative, so he was able to tell them about the summer of 1977, where he spread 10 bags of lime in the crawl space at Gacy's house. They started putting evidence together the day after that, on the 19th, and got another warrant to search Gacy's house. That same day, that lawsuit was filed, which the hearing was on December 22nd. Gacy invited them into the house again, and apparently one of the officers, Officer Schultz, walked into Gacy's bedroom in an unsuccessful attempt to write down the serial number of the Motorola TV because they thought that belonged to Cizik. And while flushing the toilet, one officer noticed a smell that, from his experience, was similar to the smell of rotting corpses coming from a heating duct. So, what they'd failed to notice is that Gacy's house had been heated recently. But on that occasion, the house was cold. So why would that smell be coming out? Rossi and Cram were interviewed again, and with that, there were links to Sizik and Priest. And this is one of the things that Rossi said when he was asked about where he thought the body for Priest was. He said, in the crawl space, he could have put him in the crawl space. Polygraph test for that was inconclusive, but a visual test on the map of Cook County showed 12 grid sections numbered 1 through 12, with Gacy's home marked on the 4th grid section. And then it was noted that Rossi's blood pressure spiked significantly when asked, is the body of Robert Priest buried in grid number 4? And Rossi freaked out so much, he stopped taking the polygraph test. He refused to go any further. But he did say that he dug some trenches when he was in the crawl space and remarked on the inconsistence. He did not deviate from where he was instructed to dig. So he's basically saying he did some digging under the house, but he was told not to go that way. Kind of like in Beauty and the Beast, where the Beast says you can go anywhere you want, just don't go in the West Wing. Weird! Cram also told them about the rape attempts from Gacy in 1976. And he said after he returned to his home, he was searching for a property. Gacy showed up and was pale with a clot of mud on his carpet that he thought come from the crawl space. Gacy grabbed a flashlight and entered the crawl space immediately to look for evidence of digging. When he was asked whether or not he'd been in the crawl space, Cram said he'd once been asked by Gacy to spread lime down there and dig trenches, which Gacy said was for drainage pipes. So he didn't even dig the own fucking graves. He had other people dig it for him. Apparently these trenches were 2 by 6 by 2. Ooh. So they weren't very deep at all. And it gets better. Gacy went to go to his lawyer's office on the 20th of December. And when he showed up, he looked like shit. He was drunk. And apparently his lawyer found a bottle of whiskey in his car. And when he asked Gacy about it, Gacy picked up a copy of the Daily Herald from the desk, pointed to the front page with Robert's Priest pictures on there, and said, "This boy is dead. He's in the river." I'm sorry, he's in a river. And after that, he started confessing that he ran into the early hours of the morning. He blurbed everything to his lawyer, stating he'd been judge, jury, and executioner of many, many people. And now he wanted to have the same for himself. He even said he buried his victims in the crawl space and disposed of 5 other bodies in the river, Des Plaines River. He said there were male prostitutes, hustlers, and liars whom he gave the rope trick, and he occasionally woke to find dead, strangled kids on the floor with their hands cuffed behind their back, who they also were buried in the crawl space on his property. He fell asleep midway through saying this shit. And a psychiatric appointment was immediately set up. He basically just blurbed everything out to these people. And with that, and the interviews of, all of this shit, they finally decided they were going to go into the crawl space to find the body of Robert Peast. But they had a signed warrant. So when they got in there, they unplugged the sub pump and flooded the space with water just to clear it. Replaced the plug, waited for it to drain, and within minutes, they found the putrefied flesh and a human bone. Yeah, it took them a while. And they ended up saying something to the effect of, I think this place is full of kids. It wasn't Peast because it was too decomposed. But they started uncovering victim after victim after victim, which ended with Gacy being arrested. Yay. On December 22nd, he got arrested. Love it. He even admitted that he planned on concealing corpses even further, covering the entire crawl space with concrete. Ooh! His trial started in February 6, 1980, and he was charged with 33 murders. He got tried in Cook County, Illinois, and in Rockford, Illinois. And basically, he was found to have multiple personality disorder he was trying to convince him that he had multiple personality disorder when they were doing some psychiatric evaluations of him to see if he was good enough to stand trial or competent enough to stand trial. So he'd said that he had 4 personalities. He said that he had Jack, who hated being homosexual, Bad Jack, the policeman, and a couple others. That's dumb as fuck. Who would believe that? Of course, they wanted to say that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, because of the Jekyll and Hyde character thing. And that didn't go very well. Psychiatric experts said that he was paranoid schizophrenic with multiple personality disorder. However, the prosecution fucking nuked that shit and gave multiple witnesses and multiple multiple instances where he was completely in control, including Cram and Rossi. So basically, he was fucked. And then the police testified about the remains they found. Rignall testified in February 21st and told everybody what happened to him. And he said he was unable to conform his actions to the law's expectations because of the beastly and animalistic ways he attacked me. He was so fucked up from this, he actually puked during his testimony and had to be excused. He was so upset he puked. And next, Voorhees. Donald Voorhees got on the stand, who was the person he assaulted in 1967, told everybody about what was going on. He attempted to give his testimony, but because he was so fucked emotionally, he had to step down. Robert Donnelly testified a week after Voorhees to recount his ordeal with Gacy in December 1977. Another little cherry on top of the shit sundae that put this guy away. The last attempt he got, by he I mean Gacy, got to try and get out of this, is that he requested a mistrial through a personal letter to the judge. And none of that worked, obviously. So, he was basically fucked on every account. Gave his closing arguments, tried to get out of it, but ultimately, he was sentenced to death for each murder that he committed after the Illinois statute of capital punishment came into effect on June 1977, with his execution being set for June 2nd, 1980. Gacy was on death row for 14 years. Tried to get himself appealed on multiple occasions until it was exhausted. All of them are exhausted. And finally, on the morning of May 9th, 1994, he was transferred to Menard Correctional Center, from Menard Correctional Center to Statesville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. He was given a private picnic on the prison grounds with his family for his last meal, where he ordered a bucket of KFC, fried shrimp, french fries, fresh strawberries, and a Diet Coke. The fucker is even so bold as to get a prayer observed by a Catholic priest before being escorted to the execution chamber for lethal ingestion. It took about 18 minutes to kill the guy. Because apparently the tubes got clogged. They were supposed to give him the chemicals. But he died. And even the prosecutor had said he got an easier death than any of his victims, which is true. Ooh. He apparently never expressed remorse for the crimes. And his final words were, "Kiss my ass." The balls. And apparently his brain was removed and used for research to isolate common personality traits of violent sociopaths. Ooh. And, apparently when he was in jail, he did a lot of paintings. And they were auctioned off. And I think the best part of this, to end with all the facts, before I go over how I finally feel about this, is that they had a bonfire with 300 people, including family members of 9 of the victims, and they used his paintings as fucking fuel. They burned the shit out of his paintings, singing fucking Kumbaya, na 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 na, hey hey, bye bye motherfucker. And that is basically all of the good stuff that has to do with Gacy. I honestly think this guy is an absolute fucking psychopath. And he deserved everything he got. So, motherfucker, eat a dick. Glad you're dead. You deserved it. So, with all of that in mind, there are 33 victims, with many more suspected. Basically, this guy got away with all this shit because he knew how to schmooze people. To the point where people would believe anything he said. And that's fucking sad. And it's fucking disgusting. So, Mr. Killer Clown, go fuck yourself. Yay. Glad you're dead. I think I've pretty much gone over everything, and I'm going to close out for the night. Hopefully it wasn't too bad with me just talking on my own, because that's probably how it's going to be a lot of the time, unless I get a lot of feedback saying, don't do that. Not working. So, I am going to thank you guys for coming out and saying hello in support of my first stream on my own. Enjoy your night. Sweet nightmares.